That's how it is. I'm going to stop talking and let you introduce yourself and your session, Gonzalo.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much again for having me here. I mean, as I mentioned before, I love being here because I know it's Friday. Um, you are doing again an amazing job on these chapters. I mean, thank you very much. So today we are going to talk a little bit about business continuity, HADR options in Azure SQL MI or in cloud in general. I mean, we receive these kind of things all the time. How we protect our business. Um, Sometimes I hear that, hey, but we are in the cloud. Why should I worry about this? Yes, you should worry. Because, I mean, you don't imagine how many times I heard that some systems were down because of some things. And it's like, hey, what did you do to protect your business or your system? Well, here we are going to discuss, to review some new stuff, some old stuff, some concepts, etc., etc. I am Gonzalo Bissio, as we mentioned before, from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am a data and AI specialist at Microsoft. I switched role last month. I mean, I was before a customer engineer, but now I am working on the sales field. Yes, I know sales is strange sometimes, but yes, I'm still technical because I love Azure SQL MI and all this stuff. Email blog, that's it, blah blah. Yes, a Rocky Balboa soldier always. We're going to talk a little introduction about Azure SQL MI. It's very little. Then we're going to review some architecture diagrams talking about HA. We're going to talk, hey, what's new, what is coming in SQL 2022 with Azure SQL MI. I think that you saw this a bunch of times. These are the options that you have, at least in Azure, to host your database. Single VMs, that is normal. You can, if we talk about high availability, you can use availability groups or always on availability group, depends how do you love to call it. Some people hate when you say always on, but for me, it's the same. What can you do using VMs? Well, you can have, for example, different VMs in different zones inside the same regions. When I say different zone, it's like, for example, in US, I am explaining this because I found a bunch of times that customers doesn't know the difference between the zones, region, and all that stuff. For example, in order to achieve high availability, you can use different zones inside the same regions. When we say regions, it's the data center, for example, US East, US East 2, US West, or North Europe, West Europe. But inside those regions, you can have, I mean, multiple VMs in different zones. Different zones means different data centers inside the same region. For example, if you are in North Europe, inside North Europe, you can choose different data centers inside the same region. They are physically located on the same side, but you can choose to protect your system between quotes using availability group in different zones, which I mean will give you a level of protection using different zones. Because if something happened to the zone itself inside the region, you can fail over. You can use synchronous because it's the same region, but at least you have some protection. Azure SQL MI, the one that we are going to talk today, Azure SQL Database, which works exactly the same. But for example, Azure SQL Database has something that Managed Instance don't, which is, as I mentioned before, this zone redundancy. You can choose to protect your, for example, Azure SQL Database using this zone protection, which is enabled in Azure SQL Database, but it is not in Azure SQL MI. In a few, I'm going to talk about the internal high availability of Managed Instance and Azure SQL Database. Both, they work the exact same way, but the difference is that in Azure SQL Database, you can choose this zone protection in where Azure SQL MI you can't. Managed solutions here. Let me see if I have enabled. Yes, I have enabled this beautiful thing. For example, if you choose Azure SQL MI or Azure SQL Database, you have this little guy here, the one that we are talking today, that you don't need to care about. How many times, I mean, do we receive emails or tickets or comments saying, hey, the backups are not running, the backups are not configured. What will happen, for example, with the high availability if I don't configure it? Well, here everything is managed by Microsoft, at least the default part, between quotes the default, which is, I mean, you don't need to do anything. The same for backups. If something happened, you can restore those backups on the same managed instance or in a different one. For Azure SQL Database, the same. Well, all the thing about patching, operating system, virtualization, all that stuff, everything is covered. Obviously, this one is in case that you want to move to a service, not a VM itself. Let's see. Okay, what is right for you? I mean, my advice is to, for example, if you receive comment from your provider that, hey, we don't support services, you would say, hey, why? Sometimes I heard that comment saying, hey, we are not supporting Azure SQL MI. The question always is why? Maybe because you have a limitation, such as, I don't know, CLR or something particular in service broker, or because you need file stream or file tables. But I mean, if you don't have any limitation, my recommendation is to go to the service. When we talk about SQL 2022, I will explain you why. One of the amazing improvements that will be added in SQL 2022 about managed instance and if you need to go back to a VM, you will be able to do that with a single backup and restore. Again, another huge change, I would not say change, but I would say advantages of having Azure is that, I mean, we can bring Azure to your data center. In case that you want to use Azure, but you don't want to use, for example, Azure Stack because the hardware is owned by Microsoft, and you, I mean, don't want to have, for example, online connection to the internet, but you want to bring the technology, we can bring Azure Arc in where you can use managed instance. This is the single, as of now, service that you can use. I mean, I am just giving you different tools or different options that you can choose to host your database, but Azure Arc will be one. Why I am mentioning service tiers here? Because we're going to talk about HA in a few on the different service tiers. Service tiers are the options that you have to choose your service. Here you have some differences. One huge difference is the internal high availability. These are, okay, by default, how your service will be protected. I mean, we have some other differences, like, for example, as of now, the space. You can choose up to 16 terabytes in GA for general purpose. You can choose in business critical 16 terabytes, but it's only in a new hardware series, which is in public preview, it's not yet in GA. And there are some other differences, MDB, among other stuff. But at least these are two options. What options normally do I choose? I'm sorry to say that, but the answer is depends. Why? Because sometimes it's about cost, sometimes it's about the space, because I found in some companies that I can't use features that are in currently preview. But depends. Honestly, I mean, I saw a bunch of business critical running. I saw a bunch of one of the advantages that you can choose with the internal HA that I am going to talk in a little, which is this little guy here. But depends. Obviously, you will have more performance in business critical, more level of protection. You don't have the 10 dB restricted, which is amazing, but you can choose. Let's talk about our topic. How many times you saw this, for example, in where you have an active region and you have a standby region, in where you have some CDN, or you have here like a load balancer saying, hey, I received the request and I forward it to the active region. Last week I have a call in where they want to have 2 active regions. And it was like, hey, I want to use Azure SQL MI. And I say, hey, but if you use Azure SQL MI, an autofill group, a feature that I'm going to talk in a few, you are going to write here. So important thing, if you have 2 different regions, you can't write in both regions at the same time. This is very important. I know that we have new requirements, we have new things that force us to use 2 regions. But the thing is, I mean, what is the only service that allows you to write in multiple regions? The answer is Cosmos DBs. This is the only relational service or non-relational service, because we can choose up to, that will allow you to write in both regions at the same time. Again, what can you do having 2 different regions? Well, first of all, you can protect your service because you can replicate. Yes, replicate would be the word. The service between 2 different regions. You can have failovers, but the thing is, you can't write in both places. So important. If you're designing a database solution that requires 2 different regions, the important thing is if you take the risk on, for example, if the request comes here and we have one and we have another one to the other region, the important thing is that you need to test this one. If you're going to write, you need to test this. You need to tell to your business, hey, I mean, we can't write in both places. We need to test what is the performance impact of this. Believe me that this happens a lot because we think that we can have, for example, components in both sides. We think that we can have database services in both sides. So the answer is yes, you can, but you can't write. I want to mention this because a very similar architecture diagram arrives to me. I think that last week it was, and they say, yes, I'm going to use Azure SQL MI because you said that Azure SQL MI is the best. You convinced me to use Azure SQL MI, and I'm going to do this. And I said, hey, you can't write. We did some tests, and we didn't have obviously the same performance in both regions. And it was like, oh, okay, let's use a single region. If something happened, you can boom, failover from one region to another. A similar case here. I talked about zones, for example. I mean, I chose this because I wanted to show you that you can have different zones. And why I chose this? Well, one of the things that we can have here, as I mentioned, is the zone redundancy feature, which is in Azure SQL Database. The second thing is that we can only protect Azure SQL MI and Azure SQL Database. I will mention both because in both is exactly the same. We can have a single secondary region, meaning that if you want to use 3 zones, you will not be able. If you need to use more than 2 regions, the only way to achieve this is to or combining Azure SQL Database geo-replication and auto failover group, saying, okay, hey, I want to geo-replicate this database from, for example, I don't know, this region to another region. But if I want to add a third region, I can create an auto failover group to that other region. I mean, it's like kind of messy, honestly, I know, but you can. Or in Azure SQL Database, you can use the some redundancy feature and that's it. But can you do this in Azure SQL MI? The answer is no. You can have a single region acting as a secondary. What will happen if your customer say, hey, I want to use 3 zones or use Azure SQL Database? No, but I mean, I hate how Azure SQL Database, I mean, the migration path is. Yes, I know. I mean, I have been there. I want backup restore. I know. So in case that the requirement is to have a third zone, my recommendation is or to use a VM in availability group or use Azure SQL Database. If you have any limitation, well, just use a VM with availability group here. Boom, that's it. Cases that happen on a daily basis. I mentioned before that in business critical, we have a different level of protection for the service that is managed behind the scenes automatically by Microsoft and the technologies availability group. Can you, for example, test failovers for this internal architecture? The answer is yes, you can. We're going to see that in a few. For the ones who love some application, I mean, it is supported in Azure SQL MI. I mean, if you want Azure SQL MI to act as publisher, distributor, or subscriptor, yes, I mean, Azure SQL MI will work. Another important thing is that transactional replication is not for HA. Believe me that I hear that a lot. You are just replicating data and that's it. You don't imagine how many times I heard that transactional replication is my HA protection. So no. From my point of view, transactional replication is just to replicate data and that's it. Gonzalo, I want to use log shipping. Can I use that? The answer is no. If you want to migrate, you can use something called log replace services, which is based on log shipping, but that will help you to migrate and that's it. Or if you want to synchronize, for example, your VM and you want to, I mean, just have Azure SQL MI in case that, acting as a DRP, synchronizing using this log shipping, which is log replace services, you can do that, but you need to know that if something happened and you fail over, you cannot fail back unless SQL 2022 appears. I don't know when. We hope soon. Internal high availability general purpose. I mean, this one is very simple in general purpose for both Azure SQL MI, Azure SQL Database. For the general purpose service tier, we have remote blob storage, I would say, acting as a file system. And we have some redundant nodes in a pool. So if something happens to the active compute node, automatically this one will come up and this one will be removed from the actual pool. And that's it. Will there be any downtime? The answer is yes, because this one will take some seconds to bring up the new node and to remove the old one. Do I have to change any connection string? Do I have to change anything? The answer is no. We don't need to change anything. Everything is managed by default, behind the scenes. A very beautiful thing, which is business critical. I mean, I love availability group. Honestly, it gave me a bunch of headaches, honestly, but I love this technology. So if you choose business critical, by default, the internal HA is this one. It's a always an availability group. Can you use secondary replica as a read replica? The answer is yes. Do you need to enable anything? The answer is no. Everything is by default. You just need to use the famous application intent read only and the initial catalog parameters in order to redirect the replicas here. And that's it. This will help you to at least offload the reads or some reads, for example, reporting reads. And let's say that something happened to the primary, what will happen is failover because these two are using synchronous, and I'm going to show you in a performance demo that the famous header sync commit will appear. And then this one will be removed from the AG, and then a new replica will come up and will join to the AG. This one on the same region, the same zone, and all that stuff. What will happen if I have, for example, some redundancy in Azure SQL Database? Well, you have these two on the same zone, and these two will be in two different zones inside the same region, but not in Azure SQL and Microsoft. We have the famous auto failover group, which honestly, behind the scenes is the same technology as the internal HA. But the difference is that we will have two different regions now. So at least we are covered in a region outage, in which obviously you're going to see on the media that an entire region goes down in Microsoft, but at least we are protected. We have some things that I want to mention because I mean, not all the people knows some small details. I mean, here you can use a read-write listener, the same that you use in availability group, but also you can use a read-only listener, which moves all the reads to the secondary region. Important thing, if you are offloading reads and the reads come from here, so be careful the time that will take the read to go from one region to another. And again, if you are using different regions, move the application, move all the interfaces that you need to, in one region, you need to move everything to the other region, because if there is a failover, if there is, I mean, for example, if you want to use the read-only listener endpoint, obviously you need to query from here. So be careful on that. How can we come? Yes, tell me.
I have a question about the listeners. Does this mean they actually have the read-write listener and the read-only listener have different names and different virtual IPs and so on?
Yes, exactly.
All right, cool.
Another important thing, can you combine, for example, for business critical, the internal high availability and auto-failover group? The answer is yes. So here, for example, we have for the internal HA, and then we can have auto-failover group to move everything to the other region. So you have two levels of protection, in-house and the other region. So some components, the thing that I want to mention, honestly, is this little guy, which is grace period with data loss. Why is important to mention this? Because, I mean, we're moving data from one region to another. So basically, Microsoft, I mean, between regions, I mean, the synchronization is asynchronous, it's not synchronous. So basically, this will be an asynchronous availability group, meaning that you can't have, for example, automatic failover. In order to be clear, I mean, will we have automatic failover? The answer is yes. But here's the thing. We have this little guy called grace period with data loss. The default value is 1, meaning that Microsoft has 1 hour to bring up your actual primary. If after 1 hour the service is still down, there will be an automatic failover from one region to another. What will happen in that hour? Well, if your system is down, I mean, if your Azure SQL MI is down, the system will be down. But this is important to mention because you will see this particular parameter and you need to know how this works. So, I mean, here you have the information if you want to read it. But the most important thing is that there will be 1 hour that Microsoft will try to bring up your service. Otherwise, there will be a failover. The default is 1. You can't, I mean, you can increase that value. For example, no, so I mean, I don't want to wait. I mean, because another thing is this guy, because it's asynchronous. It will be a forced failover because it's an asynchronous availability group. So I don't want to lose data. So maybe you can increase this value, call Microsoft, say, hey, please bring up this as soon as possible because I will lose data and I don't want it. Period. That's it. You can increase this value up to 6 hours, for example. And that's it. Read-only failover policy. So here's the thing. As I mentioned before, we have a read-write endpoint, we have a read endpoint. So what will happen if we have, for example, a failover? So if you have a failover, automatically you will have the read-write and read-only on the same side. Why? Because, I mean, between quotes, the primary is down. In case that you want to have everything on the same service, you can choose to, okay, I mean, by default is disabled. I mean, what you can choose is to, for example, disable this value, which means that in case of a failover, the read-only endpoint will point to the actual secondary in case of a forced failover. So, I mean, I was referring to, or you can enable it, meaning that after the failover, it will use the actual primary, but when the secondary is up again, this policy will change the read-only endpoint to the actual secondary. How can you change that? Using PowerShell with this command line. And you need to enable this attribute. Important thing. Some limitations I talked about, like, hey, we can't have more than one region. You can't rename it. Hey, I want to change, for example, the auto-failover group name. Well, you can't do that. But the thing that I want to add here is that, for example, I mean, you know that Azure SQL MI, Azure SQL Database is protected by TD. This is by default. I mean, by default, this is enabled. But let's say that you want to bring your own key. You say, hey, I want to create my own key on the Azure Key Vault, and I want to bring this key to the service. Can you do that? The answer is yes. But here's the thing. You know that in order to restore a TD protected database, you need to upload the certificate, create the master key, and all that stuff in a normal SQL Server in IaaS or on premises. What will happen here? Well, you need to do exactly the same. You need to upload this new key, this new certificate. That's it. How can you do that? From the portal, you can do this. But the most important thing here, we are talking about auto-failover group. So what we need to do is to upload the certificate on the primary, but do the same on the secondary. So both have the same certificate, and then configure auto-failover group. But for example, what will happen if I have an auto-failover group and I need to, for example, rotate the key? It's very normal to hear in companies every 6 months, 1 year, that you need to rotate the key or the certificate. I mean, everything related to TD. If you need to do that, you need to break auto-failover group, you need to upload the new key, and then you need to reconfigure everything. Meaning that if your application is pointed to the listener, you will have downtime. So be careful with that. I saw a bunch of customers trying to do this, and something happened in the middle. And it's like, hey, I mean, you need to upload the new key here. And I mean, that was downtime, headaches, and all that stuff. But if you plan the change, you will not have problems. But this is another thing that I want to mention. What is coming? What is new? Probably you heard about SQL Server 2022. We don't know yet when this will be, honestly, public preview nor GA. Honestly, I didn't hear that. As of now, it's in private preview. Some customers are testing this version. What is the beauty of SQL 2022? To me, is that bidirectional HADR, meaning that, for example, if you have a VM in Azure, in AWS, in GCP, in on-premises, in your house, whenever you want to have your VM, you will be able to use, I mean, I would say availability group, then I'm going to explain you what is the feature used behind scenes to connect your existing VM to Azure SQL MI. As of now, it was announced that you will be able to failover and fail back. A normal failover. For example, you do right-click failover, by failover. That's it. But the good thing, for example, is something that happened to me a lot. It's like companies are more data-driven and they want to execute their reports on their systems. They want to execute the analytics thing. They want to take the decisions based on data. And they say, hey, I mean, I want to use services, not VMs. This happened a lot to me. So one of the good things is that you will be able to query your database as a secondary for this availability group, and you can run your reports on that stuff, which is amazing, honestly. In a couple of seconds, you will be able to execute a failover and fail back, and you say, hey, I want to test Azure SQL MI. Okay, let's go there. Boom. You can test it, you can use it. Hey, I prefer to go to the VM again. Okay, fail back. Well, that's it. In a couple of seconds, you will be on the VM or on the service. Ivan, is there a question? No?
Nope.
The other amazing thing is that you will be able to backup and restore a managed instance on your IaaS or on your own premises. I mean, in case that you say, hey, I mean, I use Azure SQL MI, but I don't want to use it anymore. You can backup and restore your database and on this SQL 2022 VM, and that's it, which is amazing because today it's not supported, but in SQL 2022, it will be. For me, it's amazing. As I mentioned, this DR in the cloud. Behind scenes, this availability group is being used. This one is a new feature introduced in SQL 2016, which will allow you to have two different clusters, two different availability groups. Obviously, they are connected through SQL, not through Windows. In case that you want to combine, for example, a Windows cluster and a Peacemaker Linux cluster, you will be able to connect these two different OSs. In case that you want to migrate your existing system in a couple of seconds, you can use this use availability group. This one is amazing. But this one is the technology used behind PASS. Before the demos, I am not seeing any questions. Let's see, I have some demos I prepared for you. So basically, how can we create Azure SQL MI? It's very easy. You can create, you choose the Azure SQL MI and that's it. But let's say that we want to enable auto failover group. I am going to show you auto failover group in Azure SQL Database because, as I mentioned on my previous talk about Azure SQL MI, we are using VNets. For some reason, I cannot use a different IP regardless of the region. When I try to connect these two different VNets, I got an issue saying, hey, you have the same number of IPs, you need to choose a different one. So I was not able to connect these two different VNets. But I'm going to show you in a few how this works. So how do you enable failover groups in Azure SQL MI? On the data management section, you click failover group. You will see this beautiful map where this will show you your existing primary. You click add group. Here you choose a failover group name. Let's say here you choose your secondary instance. You click create and boom, that's it. The process will start. You don't need to do anything else. What will happen behind the scenes is that there will be an automatic seeding process or a seeding process that will synchronize both instances, and that's it. Also, Gonzalo, you told me that if I choose business critical, by default, I will have high availability. So in case that you want, for example, to migrate or to scale up your instance from general purpose to business critical, you can just click, let's say that you're here. You click business critical, you choose in case that you want different big cores or more storage and all that stuff. You click apply, boom, the process will start. That's it. Will there be any downtime? The answer is yes. When? So here we are creating a new, I would say, new VMs, new services. They will be synchronizing between them. When the synchronization finishes, there will be a failover. Boom. During this failover time, you will see downtime, which is a couple of seconds. So, Gonzalo, I want to see that you are not lying to me, and I want to see that I can connect to the secondary replica. Okay. So basically what you need to do in order to connect to the secondary, I mean, here I am using my Azure SQL MI. If you never see it, honestly, just in case, I will show you that you need to use here this host name. and I am still not. Okay. I have my SQL Server authentication soon. One of the announcements was that Windows authentication will be supported, but as of now, I am using SQL authentication. You click connect, and boom, that's it. So second, because this one's frozen. Okay, in the meantime, I will show you while this one opens. Yes, I know that it's busy. Okay. If I use, for example, my database, create table, I don't know, hello, so I was able to create my table. So what will happen now if I use here, applicate equal read-only, and initial catalog equals to adventure. So if everything works as I expect, again, PC, come on. One sec, because this guy is busy. Yes, I know that you're busy. Yes, I mean, it's Friday. I know that all of us are busy. So let's create hello to. As you can see, it's so using two attributes allows me to go to the secondary. Before, I remember that when I executed this, here the name was not this one. It show you, if I show you in Azure SQL Database, you will see the real host name, but I don't know if was Nico or someone who discovered this and updated the name, because on my previous demo, I show you the different names on the servers, but now somehow this one was modified. So now, okay, we know that we can go to the primary, we know that we can go to the secondary. For example, what will be the performance impact? What will be, for example, something that you will see on the weights? For example, let's say that you are troubleshooting performance. I'm going to use, oops, I forgot to. I am using OSTress. This is free. You need to download the RML tool in case that you want to execute some performance test. You can use this. This automatically will create some threads and will do some noise, etc., etc. I am using this I love SP who is active. You will see all the sessions created. I am executing an insert select, and that's it. But what I wanted to show you is that, for example, let's choose, I don't know, 150, 146. This particular table will tell you, hey, this particular session wait for all of this stuff. I wanted to show you that it didn't appear yet. Let me choose another one. I'm going to show the very known HADR commit 135. Let me see. Because you're using availability group. So I want to show you, come on, up here. Let's see other one. I will wait for a couple of more seconds. Let's choose 136. I am showing you here all the weights related to that particular session. Let me see. I want to see the HADR sync commit. Let me see for the one. I mean, it's very little, but it will be there. Let's see, 130. 143. Everything. On page 9, well, this one is very known, but I'm still not seeing, well, it should appear the HIDR sync commit, which is good for the service, but it's bad to me because I wanted to show you that the HIDR sync commit will appear. But let me move forward because I don't have too much time. I want to show you failover groups. As I mentioned before, I enabled this on an Azure SQL database. Why it's working here? Because by default, Azure SQL database is open to internet, so both services by default will see each other. Basically, I mean, here you will see exactly the same because both work on the same way. As I mentioned on the other map, you will have the primary and the secondary. Here, you will see the role, which is the primary, which is the secondary. So by default, you know, hey, this region is the actual primary. Here, you will see the read-write listener endpoint, and here the read-only listener endpoint. So let's see if that is the true. Let me just close this. Let's open your connections. So here we have SQL Friday test. If I, for example, move to the database, I cannot use this will work because this one is the actual read-write listener. But let's go to the read-only. Let's see if that is the truth. If this one is not lying to me. If I do exactly the same, this should fail because it's read-only. But now let's see. No. As you can see, here is what it was not yet modified, in where you can see the server name is 06 blah 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 blah, which is the SQL Friday secondary. So let's go again to the read-write endpoint, which is SQL Friday test. If I do this, as you can see, the server name is different, meaning that we are in two different servers. But let's say that you want to test the failover. What can you do? This will work exactly the same in Managed Instance. It is exactly the same. As you can see here, we have a normal failover. You click failover, you click yes, boom, the failover will start. Will you have downtime? Yes, absolutely, it's a failover. So, I mean, you need to move from one server to another, and then you need internally, I mean, the process internally will modify the endpoint to use exactly the same. So there will be a small failover, a small downtime. In the meantime, let me see if they wait here, because I mean, this is possible. Yeah. So you can see. It's on the list, yes. I mean, it's small, it's only 11 milliseconds. In terms of performance, the impact is almost minimum. But at least I was not lying to you that availability loop was not used. So yes, it is here. Let me see it here. So now, who is the primary? Is US2. And the former primary now is acting as secondary. And I have 7 minutes. I have some other demos, but I think that the most important thing is to listen to you, listen your questions if you have any. You can tell me that you hate Managed Instance, please don't, but I want to hear it.
I have one question with the the synchronous and asynchronous stuff. If I have a big table and I want to rebuild an index, normally with on-premise, I would change the synchronous replication to asynchronous. Can I do that with the Azure SQL MI if I use business critical?
No.
Okay. So then I will
Suffer
if I have
a lot.
If I have a 1 terabyte index and I want to rebuild it, I have to be really careful to just do it with max top 1 and hope for the best, I guess. Because
yes, I mean, the thing. Yep.
your 11 seconds with the HADR sync commit will be a bit higher when you do a rebuild index, I guess.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, I mean, I suffer that. I mean, the thing is, you have two problems, not only one. The synchronous commit, you can also have problems because, I mean, if you use the online mode and you use 10 dB, in business critical, you don't have any limit in terms of space. So if you need 1 terabyte, you need to make sure, or at least to measure the size of the 10 dB needed, because otherwise you can fill up the service. Because in business critical, you don't have limitation. I mean, in general purpose, the size of the 10 dB depends on the number of cores that you choose. It's limited and it is not shared by the instance space. But in business critical, you don't have any limit. So if you assign 2 terabytes, for example, for the service, and you use 1 terabyte for the 10 dB, you can fill up the service, you can have downtime. So you have to be careful.
Yeah, I guess it does require some testing with this. I did. I mean, this was on premise, but it's the same mechanism. I I tried doing a rebuild index, online rebuild, and I mean it looked like it worked, but when it started redoing on the other side, I got huge blocking and we had downtime of like half an hour on a super intensive system. So
yes,
bad
I
luck
have
for
been
me.
there. I mean, it's difficult because some customers, for example, I have different cases in where they decided to not rebuild indexes, for example, and just update statistics. Other cases I have in where, hey, I need to rebuild my index and it is taking forever to finish. I mean, it will depend. Other one, for example, using SQL 2019, use resumable indexes, but you need to rebuild it or to recreate it in order to enable this. But then what is the impact on using resumable indexes processes? There are some operations that you can't do on the table. So the best way will be, I mean, I have book answers like, hey, use partitioning, and that's it. But sometimes we can't do partitioning because, I mean, when we, for example, receive the system, it's like, hey, I have this table, I have this index, you need to handle this. That's it. Yeah. You can't use partitioning, you can't use resumable indexes. It's like, hey, I mean, I am hand tied, you know, I can't do anything. But yes, I have been there. I know how painful it is. And the thing, we don't have some things to change here. Some factors that we can modify. Yes, I know.
Yeah, but but I would say SQL Server is a pretty, I'm not going to say old because it still feels modern, but I mean, it has some years under the hood. And compared to SQL Server database engine as a product, Azure SQL MI is still just a baby. So I guess these features will come eventually, but it's good to know about it and just don't jump into it, I guess.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, I mean, probably you know Nico, which is the best. I mean, this guy is incredible, but not only Nico, the entire team is doing a bunch of things in Azure SQL MI. We have internally some teams grouping where they share all the news and all the things that they are working. And honestly, they are working in a bunch of things. They like I don't know, like 20 items that they are working. I know that maintenance is one of them. Probably soon we'll see some news on the index rebuild thing. But yes, I mean, I know that SQL is almost here for more than 30 years. And sometimes dealing with these kind of things, I mean, it's hard, I know, but I mean, it's our job, you know. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we will not have any job.
True. No, and I like that you say that. I mean, you could take a textbook answer, but it's not going to be valid anyway, because as you say, normally I don't work with systems that are new. Almost never. It's always has 10 years of history, and if the biggest table is not partitioned, well, then I need to rebuild it to partition it. So then I'm stuck in a loop in a way. So.
Yes, and I mean, you have also sometimes in the middle providers that say, hey, I don't support partition. And it's like, why? I mean, internally, it's the same. We're not touching the table. We are just partitioning it. We are just like breaking this, I mean, huge container in small parts. And that's it. We're not doing, no, but I don't support it. Blah, blah, blah. You don't imagine how many times do I have this conversation? It was like, hey, I mean, you want to fix the problem? This is the solution. I mean, can you partition in Azure SQL MI? The answer is yes, you can. You can add file groups, you can add files, you can partition. Internally, obviously, the location of the file will be managed automatically. But sometimes I know that having those conversations, I mean, it's very hard because sometimes you don't have any other solution. But I hope you don't have those kind of conversations, which I don't think so.
No, but I think it's usually I have them when a client, they're on premise, they use standard edition, the databases are 6, 7, 8 terabytes, and they say we can't have any downtime, and I say then you're talking to the wrong person, because I'm not Harry Potter. If you don't at least spend some more money on Enterprise Edition, I can't really help. But some, I mean, you can still do some magic. You can implement you close to no downtime, but no downtime is impossible in all cases. Even with the failover, it's going to take a few seconds. So.
Yes, I agree with you. In fact, I saw developer editions, honestly, not here in Microsoft, but in some former works, I saw like 5, 6 terabyte databases in developer. And it was like, hey, you're using developer in production. And it's like, yes.
But it was too expensive with licenses.
Anyway, things that happen to us on a daily basis. Come on. At least we can share.
I can understand if some companies think that, database licenses are too expensive, but those are not the clients who have 5, 6, 7 terabyte databases. If you have that, you can afford the licenses as well. So that's my take on it, at least. So we see Rocky.
Yes, always. I mean, yes. I think that I will include on my next session, like the photo when I went to the rock stars. I was in my honeymoon. I was younger than now. I mean, now I have like 1 year in Microsoft, which is equal to 10. So I will include the picture. I mean, on the rock star saying, hey, I did it, to my wife, obviously. Hey, I did it. But yes. Okay, folks, any other question? Anything that you want? Well, again, thank you for joining the session. If you need any help, if you have any question, whatever you need, you have my contact. Again, Magnus, amazing. Yep. Amazing what you're doing. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope we can talk again soon. And take care.